Well, Daryl James, thank you very much for doing this. I've heard a lot about you. I've read a lot about you. I know that you've experienced a lot. You've been through a lot of extraordinary things. Would you mind just starting at the beginning and just give us an overview, a background of your experience in the military and where it went from there?
Yeah, of course, Ted. I joined in January of '99, the Navy. Went battalion, served in Iraq. I was in Kuwait in March 18th of 2003, and I was in country March 20th, the day the war started. And then after that, I re-enlisted and I went over to St. Maugen, England. And when I got picked up from the bus station by the first class petty officer, he just said, this is a weird base. That's kind of all he said. And so I went to the base, and I was only there a few days. And one of the guys came into where I worked. I worked in the garage. I didn't work in the underground base. This was an underground base, but I worked in the garage. And one of the guys came in and said, "You have to escort some civilian workers into the underground base." So I went to the underground base, and there was like these sliding glass doors, and the doors opened up, and there was something that looked like a metal detector, like you would see at an airport. And they were civilian workers from the corporation Siemens. And the first guy said, "I'm not going through that bloody thing." So I thought, I don't want to go through it either. And I walked around. I went to walk around with them, and there was a guard, an English guard with like a beret. He had a rifle over his shoulder. He was behind a stainless steel table, and he said, "No, you walk through." So I looked at it, and I just thought, well, it's just a metal detector, and I walked through. And yeah, I watched them fix a pump, and that was about it. And I left. And then I had watch on Friday, which I had the balls to four, they call it in the Navy, which means 0 100 to 4 in the morning. So midnight to 4 in the morning. And when I came in, I saw Michael Aquino, who's like a colonel in the Army. And I saw him on Oprah. So when I was young, so I knew who he was right away. He has like curled up eyebrows, like in the horns. He's a psychological operations officer. And he was looking through some paperwork on the quarterdeck, and the quarterdeck's like the lobby of the base. It's like, where you go to check in if you're going on leave, things like that. They keep a logbook, all that stuff. And he was just reading some paperwork, and he said hi to me, and he was just talking to me, and I got kind of creeped out by him because I recognized who he was. He was part of the whole Presidio case. I don't know if you remember that. It started the whole expression satanic panic. It was an army base where there was a nurse, there was like a preschool, to watch the people's kids while they're at work. And the kids talked about how they were led to a hatch that led to an underground tunnel that led to Aquino's house. And there were allegations of, pedophilia and all that stuff. And he was the one, I'm pretty sure he was the one that started that expression, satanic panic, because that's what he does. He's psychological operations, just like conspiracy theory. If you just give it like a couple syllables or a couple words, people will just, blow it off like it's not true. So, yeah, I saw him. I said, "I'm going to do another round, sir," because I was rover watch. I walked around the base, made sure nobody was doing anything, things like that, kind of like a guard. And I went on another round, and then that was the end of him. And I did another Friday balls to four, which isn't common. It's only like when you get in trouble that because it's it's a Friday night and it takes up your whole Friday night. So I had another one, and there was a first class petty officer of the watch, and he had a blonde mustache, and he was a little overweight. And he pointed at this computer screen. He said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "What, did you get that off the internet?" And it just looked like your stereotypical like gray. It was a black and white picture, and he was in a like room, like looking up at the camera, like the camera was up on the wall, up in the corner. And he said, "I said, did you get that off the internet?" And he said, "No, look." And when he said, "Look," next to that sliding glass door where you go into the underground base, there was like a window that stopped like 6 inches from the ceiling and 6 inches from the floor, like a really big window. And this thing was just standing behind it. and it was like a light brown. The picture was black and white, but he was like light brown. He had big black eyes. He had like a fold of skin that went from his tear ducts down to his cheekbones, small mouth, no nose, no ears. And he said, Do you mind if it comes in here?" And I said, "Does it mind if I like stare at it?" Because I didn't know if it was like a wild animal, if it would attack me. Like I didn't know. I was really like scared. I was freaked out. And he said, "No, it doesn't mind." And I heard it say, "No, I don't mind," like in my head, like telepathically. And so, the sliding glass doors opened up. It walked into the main quarterdeck, and that same guard was behind him. That same English guard with the rifle over his shoulder, and it looked like it had like a silver pistol in its hand. And I just got back from Iraq, so I said, "Gun, gun, gun," and nobody did anything. And I stood up and I yelled, "Gun!" and I pointed them right at him. And they all stopped and said, "It's not a gun." And he kind of put his hand out to like let me see what it was, but it looked just like a polished metal like pistol to me. And so I'm thinking in my head like, well, is it going to take a sample from me like Star Trek, or is it one of those things in Star Trek? I didn't know what to think. And on the ground in front of me, there was like this government issue Dell computer, and it took it apart. It was a little drill, is what it was, and it didn't have to guide the bit in. It just was like a machine, one after another, and it was catching all the screws in its hand. And it had fingers really long, like it had to kind of keep its hands in C shapes, or it would have drug its fingers on the ground. And real long palms and real long fingers. It was only about, I don't know, 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall. And yeah, took it apart, slid off the top, popped out 2 gigs of RAM, put 2 gigs on top of the table. I had to reach up, grabbed 2 other gigs of RAM, popped them in like in one motion, slid it back on, and it was kind of flicked its wrist to set the screws in between its fingers. And it was just able to put it together almost as quickly as it took it apart. It was like a machine. And then it just stood there and looked at me. And I kind of went like that, and it turned its head for me, and I went like that, and it turned its head, and I looked at its hands, and it moved its hands back and forth. And I had no nipples, no navel, no genitals. Like it was just smooth, and it looked almost kind of plastic. The way, like the skin. I remember seeing the skin in its pits, the way it wrinkled and everything like that. It looked almost like vinyl or something. It didn't look natural. And I think I said in my head, "Can I touch you?" And I leaned over to touch it because I was kind of trying to make this seem real to me because it still didn't seem real. I was in shock. And the first class said, "Don't touch it." And so I got kind of bored with it. And I just started looking around, and it walked away, turned around, walked away. And then the guard went behind them, and they went back in the underground base. And the first class petty officer said, "What did you think about that?" And I said, "Pretty weird." And he said, "Do you think you could work around something like that?" And I think that's what it was for. It was like to gauge my reaction to see what I would do. And he starts looking in through his computer, and he says, "You're smart." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, like really smart." And I said, "Well, what, like 130, 140 IQ?" And he said, More like 190, 195." And he pointed at the screen, and there were like these color coded kind of lines that kind of went up a little bit. And he said, "See, you're the second smartest guy on base." And so there's one above me, and I was there, and there was a gap, and then there was others, and there was all the guys, like the average IQ. There was a big clump of just different colored lines. And he was telling me things like, "You smoke, but you don't have any clots," because I smoked at the time. And then he said, "That's because you drink," because I drank at the time. And so this machine, whatever this metal detector I thought it was some sort of scanner that could just tell everything. It could tell your IQ. It could tell if you had any clots. It could tell everything. And he starts asking me if I had any hobbies. And I said, "Well, I used to play classical guitar." And he said, "Oh, they'll like that." And I said, "What do you mean they?" And he's like, "Well, there's Germans up there." And I said, "Up where?" And he said, "Well, in the moon and beyond." And he said, "There's others too." And I didn't know what he was talking about. I was still kind of, what's happening? Kind of, I had that mindset. I was walking around, pacing, running my fingers through my hair. I was in shock. I was very in shock. And I was, when I was sitting down, I sat back down and I was pinching myself. And he said, I was with my thumb on my thigh, and he said, "Do you think you're dreaming?" And I said, "No, I'm leaving a mark just in case you guys try to wipe my mind, so I can have some sort of mark." And I gave myself a blood blister. I did it so hard, and I mean, yeah, that was about the end of it. He was telling me things like, I said, "What are they?" Because I was interested. And he said, "We don't know." He said, "All we know is they've been here as long as us, and they once lived on the, above up above like us, and we used to worship them like gods. But we got into a war with them, but we had outside help, and but we were involved in the war, and part of the contract of the treaty or whatever, a surrender, is they had to live underground. So they've been doing things like infiltrating our religion and things like that slowly to try to gain power back of Earth and everything like that." So yeah, it was just very surreal. And he asked me if I had any tattoos, and I said no. And he said, "Good, because the Germans don't like tattoos." And I asked him, Germans from today, and he said, no, the 40s, mostly 30s and 40s. And yeah, it was just very, I don't know, surreal, and it was scary. So it was the next day, and I woke up and I saw the blood blister on my thigh, and I was like, oh God, it was real, like I thought it was like, it was that much of an impactful, shocking thing to where I didn't even think it was real. And I saw one of the guys in the barracks, and he said, so what did you think? And I said, what? And he said, long spindly fingers, big black eyes, kind of creepy looking. And I said, oh yeah, I forgot. And I forgot again. Like, it was just, my mind did not want to accept this. That is kind of like how it was. I just kept forgetting. I kept on saying, no, this can't be real. This can't be real. And then that was more of a confirmation. And then it went on to things like, we used to play the game Halo in the barracks on Xbox. And we were waiting for a game, the next game. And one of the guys said, did you see that reptile on the base today? And then the other guy said, yeah, he was big and he talked funny too. And I said, what? Like, I kind of thought they were just talking about like a reptile, like you would think, like a four-legged reptile. I thought maybe they lived in the caverns or something like that underneath the earth. And they said, no, no. I said, there's reptiles underground. They said, oh yeah, you're new here. There's reptiles. And they said, you'll see them. And I said, so they just walk around all fours and they talk to you? And they said, no, they walk upright like us. And they have, two arms, two legs, fingers, and they're like humanoid, but they're reptiles. And I thought they were messing with me because I was the new guy, because I'd only been there for like a week, so I just kind of blew it off. And then so on Monday when I went back to work, one of the guys came up and he said, James, he said, the XO wants to talk to you, which is the executive officer, which is the second in command on the base. And usually they'll ask you to their office, they'll call you to their office, but they rarely come to where, your workstation where you work. So, and I asked him, I said, has this ever happened before? And he said, no. So I walked out and I met him, and we started walking a while. And, he asked me what I thought about it. He said, it's pretty interesting, huh? And I said, yes. And he asked me if I've ever heard of Project Solar Warden. I said, no. And he said, well, you ever heard of the United States Navy secret space program? And I said, no, but I think I could figure that one out. And he said, we have this program called the 20-year and back. You do 20 years. After you're done with your 20 years, we'll send you back in time 20 years, age regress you 20 years, wipe your memory, and you'll wake up in bed like nothing happened. And I couldn't wrap my head around age regression. I said, I can believe in time travel and, wiping one's mind, but I just find it difficult to believe age regression. And he said, after what you just saw, you find that difficult to believe. And I said, well, touche, sir. I said, but yes. And he said, well, it's true. He wasn't interested in convincing me any further. And he told me about Gary McGinnon, who was in the UK area, I think Scotland at the time. And he hacked into NASA. And this was less than a year ago. So it was like kind of like a current event. and he got all these files. He hacked in the Army, the Navy, and NASA. And in the Navy, he found something called Project Solar Warden, and he found all these ranks and social security numbers of extraterrestrial officers and all these other things. Cigar-shaped craft over the moon, and he said it's all real. He said all of it. He said the only reason that they didn't extradite him and arrest him, the claim was is because he was autistic. But what Robert told me was because if they would have extradited him, he would have been able to call witnesses because he would have been in court, and it was already such a public case, so it would have blew the lid off Solar Warden. So they just let him go. And yeah, he told me about that, and he was telling me he said with your scores, I guarantee you'll make commander and you'll be pilot of a 4 kilometer long starship. And he's that's how he put it, starship. And I started asking him all these questions, like, is the universe ever growing like Einstein says? And he said, no, it has a limit. And I said, well, how long would it take to get to the end? And he thought about it, and he said, nearing the speed of light is how he phrased it. He said around 8 years. But he said with a proper amount of jumps, 15 minutes. And so, yeah, he was just telling me this, and I thought about it. And my father, when I was 19, my father passed away of, they call it a widowmaker. And he had like a heart attack. No warning, no cholesterol. His cholesterol wasn't high or anything like that. He just, chunk of cholesterol was on the artery and it broke off and he died. And I said, if we had technology like that scanner, that could read clots and everything else, I said that would have saved his life. And I said, well, why don't we have that for the public? And he started going in on about, population control and all this other stuff. And I said, well, there has to be a side that wants to bring that to the public. And he said, you mean like a traitor? And I said, no, sir. He said, there just has to be like a faction, a side, or people that want to bring this public. And he said, well, there is. And I said, well, if you bring me to that side, if you can put me on that side, I'll do it. And we walked a little bit further, and I shook his hand, saluted him. And as he was walking away, he said, one more thing, Mr. James. And he was calling me Mr. too, which only officers call each other Mr. I was like a petty officer, so I wasn't Mr. And he said, one more thing, Mr. James. He said, you're going to be escorted by a reptile, and he's big. And I really didn't know what he was talking about. I heard what the guys were saying, but everything was just kind of blown over my head because I had no, I was just some guy who worked construction. I didn't think, I didn't think I had a high IQ. I remember the guy at the quarterdeck said to me, Leo, I thought of myself as intelligent, but I didn't think that much. And I remember the guy at the first class petty officer said, were you homeschooled? And I said, no. And he said, I guess you just slipped through the cracks. So it seemed like if they find out you have a high IQ, they put you in these programs, is what it sounds like when you're young, when you're a child. And so, yeah, I was in the barracks, I think the next night, and we were playing Halo again. And this one guy, he started going on about how he was in the moon. He's like, I was up in the moon and it was great. And he said, they put you in these work groups and they put shock collars on you, and you don't work. Somebody in the group doesn't work properly, work hard enough. They shock everybody. And he said, but there are these brothels and there's all these women you could sleep with. He said your only motivation to work was sex. So, they gave you all these brothels, all these women to sleep with. And I thought maybe the XO said this to everybody, what he said to me about being a pilot. And I thought maybe I'd wind up in the mines or something because I was hearing this story. And I said, well, the XO came up to me, personally, and he said that, I have 195 IQ and I would become the pilot of a 4 kilometer long starship. I said, did he come up to you personally and tell you any of this? And he goes, no, no, man. He's like, you're going to be up there. He said, they're going to take good care of you. He's like, you're going to have a great time. And he said, when you come back, they're going to put you in this chair and all you have to do is fight it. He said, if you fight it, you'll remember. And he said that. And then all of a sudden, this feedback loop happened in the room, like an intercom. And it said, now hear this, now hear this. You are now in violations of Articles 5 and 6 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. If you do not stop right now, you could face up to 10 years in prison and $100,000 in fine. That'll be all. And it went away. And I looked around and I said, is there a speaker in here? And another one of the guys said, no, with the technology they have, they don't need speakers. And I tried to talk about like what happened, what just happened. He said, we should stop talking. They're listening to us now. So I just kind of let it go. And the next day, one of the guy, that same guy that told me about, what did you think about the drone? They call them drones, big black eyes, long spindly fingers. It was that same guy. Everybody called him Lando because he likes Star Wars, like Lando Calrissian and stuff. And he said, "Did you hear that? That voice in the room?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, Have you noticed those rectangular blocks on the radio tower near the underground base?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "That's something called 5G. It's an experimental technology they're using here." He explained to me that they could put a microwave beam into a room. They could hear everything, they could see everything, and they could look around and they could talk if they wanted. So it's almost like a way of bugging your room without having to break in or anything like that. So that was news to me about the whole 5G thing. And those things are everywhere now. But yeah, so I remember it was the night before I was going to go because they were going to do it on another Friday. So it was the next Friday I was going to do it. So I had another, balls to four watch the third time on a Friday. And this was the Thursday before, and I was in the TV room, and the door was open, and the door right across the hall, that door was open, and it was almost like this guy was kind of talking so I would hear him, I would overhear him, and he was saying things like they're going to put you into they're going to take you into a room and strap you down to a chair. It's a density chamber. He said most of the ETs we deal with are fifth density, and they're just too fast and intelligent for us to work with them properly. And he said he said we're third density, but once you get bumped up to fifth density, you'll become stronger, faster. Your IQ will go up 200 points, and you'll become more of a collective, like when in a group. It's like when you're part of a group, it's like you become that group. It's kind of how it feels. And I asked the XO later in the story, were they doing these things on purpose? Were they told to do this to kind of acclimatize me to the situation because I had no idea? And he said yes. And so yeah, the next day, I showed up for watch the next evening, and I signed like a lot of papers. And he was doing that whole thing like when you sign a mortgage, he was flipping the papers, and everything was already X'd for me. He said, sign here, sign here. He's just doing it one after another. And I was trying to read it at first, and it was really, I don't know what you'd call it, esoteric kind of stuff. It was like the consciousness of the first party now belongs to the second party and stuff like that. And I got cold feet, and I said, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't think I should do this. And he said, you're already back there, so they signed the damn papers, is what he said. So he was talking that I was already back being age regressed because it takes you a little while to be age regressed. So I realized I was in a time loop, and it was kind of eerie. And in my head, I was like, oh, I'm doing this for dad. Like I'm doing this for dad, and I signed it all. He said, sit down. I sat down, and he got on the phone. He said, send him in. And I waited about 5 minutes, and he said, all right, go with him. I was kind of daydreaming, and he said, all right, go with him. And he pointed at that same big window, and behind it was this huge reptile. He's probably about 9.5 feet tall. He had to kind of like duck. He was kind of like cowering, like ducking to be in this room. He had like one of those skin tight blue suits on. He was dark brown. He had like gold alligator eyes. His mouth kind of went straight across and up. He had like these ridges, almost like mohawks going down his head, but it wasn't hair. It was just like part of his bone or his skin. And I stood up and I said, Jesus Christ. I said, he's not going to eat me, is he? Because I never seen anything like that before. And he said, he's much faster and stronger than you. If he wanted to eat you, he would have done it by now. And when I said that, it sighed, like it let a big 3-second inhale and a big 3-second exhale. And the last one was telepathic. And I said, can you read my mind? And he said, yes, you can read your mind. I remember I said, sorry about that in my head. And then, so it came out, walked through the doors with it. There was this skinny guard behind him. And I found out later he was an off-world German, is what they call them. They have off-world Germans in the military in these underground bases, is what they call them, and that's precisely what they are. They're like Germans that live on another world. And it had to do with like you know, back in the 40s, they were channeling beings they didn't really know, and the ETs, whatever you want to call them, and they were telling them things like to go to Antarctica and how to reverse engineer all this technology there, and yeah, they discovered all this ET tech in Antarctica, and they created their own world pretty much. And so I went with them, and the kid kept on butt stroking me in the back, like hitting me with his rifle, and because I didn't realize like the situation I was in, and I just thought he was some guy in the army, and I said, "Please stop hitting me. I'm not looking around." I was staring right at the reptile's back. I said, "Please stop hitting me." Oh yeah, and there were like white, blue, and red lines on the floor, painted on the floor of this underground base. And white was secret, blue was top secret, and red was like above top secret. So red went everywhere, white went to the fewest places, and it looked like kind of colored spaghetti all over the place, all over the floor. And there were certain hallways that were dark when I first walked in with the Siemens guys, and I just thought maybe there's a motion sensor that the light turns on, and those are the hallways that were only red. And so immediately we walked down one of these only red hallways, and no light came on. So I thought maybe I guess these things can see really well in the dark. So I was following it kind of close because I didn't want to lose it. And he kept on hitting me, and then I don't know, like the third time I turned around and I grabbed this weapon and I put my foot behind his and I just threw him to the ground and knocked the wind out of him. And I held it up by the barrel over his head and I said, if you hit me with this thing one more time, I'm going to shove it up your ass sideways. And I heard the reptile behind us say, "Leave us," he said. And it was very deep. It was almost like the first things they say is like deeper than any man can be, but it sounds almost like they have to push that last syllable out. So it was like, "Leave us." It was kind of like that. And he got up and he looked at me and he looked at his weapon and he looked at me and he looked at his weapon and I just held it out and he grabbed it and he, took off. And I turned around and this reptile was like right here. And he had all his muscles flexed and I could see like his eyes over his chest muscles. And he was just like showing me how big he was. And then I remember I said, I'm sorry about what I said before. You're much more civilized than him." And they don't have any muscles in their face, so they don't bare their teeth and they don't furrow their brows. The only way you can tell they're annoyed with you is their eyes get small. So his eyes were small at first, then his eyes just opened normal. And he turned around and started walking and he said, "Follow me." So I was following him and I was looking around now and I could see things like we got to like a bigger room and there were things like bicycles leaning against the wall, like golf carts, kind of like if somebody had to go deeper and further in the underground base, I could just jump on a bike and go somewhere. And we were gradually like walking downhill the whole way. And we eventually went up a catwalk, like a 3-step catwalk. And there was one of those like watertight doors that you see on ships. It had the wheel on it and everything like that. And he walked in and I followed him and he said, "Get in the chair." And this chair, it was big, like it was made for one of them. And had holes in it, straps. And I remember during the DARE program with Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan and stuff like that, it was like to stop kids from doing drugs and things like that. They brought a gas chamber chair into the school. And I was only like 6 years old, and they brought it into it, like in a trailer. And it had the bucket under it, and the chain that dropped the cyanide into the water and caused the gas chain reaction. And that's immediately what I thought of, because that chair scared me so much seeing that. And it freaked me out. And I ran. And it grabbed me by the back of the neck. It just threw me in the chair. And it started strapping my arm in. And it was so big, like it was able to put its hand over my arm, but still grab like the arm of the chair to keep me down. And I remember I saw its nails, and it had like black nails. They came out like ours. They were normal like ours, but then they kind of curled into themselves and created like points, like needles. And that's how their nails were. And he was very dark brown, very dark, flat face, like I said, with the mouth just straight across and the alligator eyes. I was trying to get away. I grabbed his thumb and I was pulling it up, and he hit me. I don't know if he headbutted me or what, but I got hit in the head and I kind of blacked out for a second. And then when I came to, that arm was in, and he was strapping my right leg in. So I kind of got off the chair. It was so big, I kind of had to like I stepped off of it and I was undoing the strap, and he like grabbed me by like put his palm on my chest and just threw me back in the chair, and his fingers were like up here and his palm was here. That's how big he was. And he leaned in and he did almost like that sound that alligators do, like the mating call, where it's like you can feel it in your chest, like you can feel the percussion of it, but you really can't hear it. And it was kind of like that. And he leaned into me real slowly, and he was making this growling noise. And he said, "Don't make me hit you again." And when he did that, I jammed my thumb in its eye because I was just so freaked out, like I was doing anything I could to get away from this. You know what I mean? I had no I wasn't acclimatized to this. I never. Other guys I found out later on they work around these things. So whenever they join the program, they're used to it already. But I worked in the garage, and all those, they were CBs, and they asked me like, "Why were you a CB?" And I said I had a marijuana paraphernalia charge when I was 18 or 19. So all I could do was construction or be a cook. And so most of those guys had like pretty low IQs, so they never actually recruited anybody from the garage on the other side of the base. And yeah, so it put its hand on me, and it pressed so hard it caved my chest in, and pushed against my heart, and I just blacked out. I just lost consciousness. And when I came to, I was completely strapped in. And I remember he said, "I'm sorry I have to do this to you." And I went to a panel I really couldn't see. It was on the same wall as the door, and it was doing something I couldn't tell. And then it walked out, and I saw the wheel tighten, and I was just like hyperventilating because I was thinking maybe if I make myself pass out, it won't hurt as much or something. So I was breathing really heavy, and I looked up and I saw like kind of a dish like around my head. It was like this glowing dish. It was white or glowing or something like that. And I got this feeling. It was almost like an out of body experience. It was it felt like weightlessness, cold, and then peace. And it was almost like I could feel my consciousness kind of coming out of my body. It felt like when I came to, the straps were undone, and I looked to the right, and there were three guys on like a big king size bed on the floor next to me, and they just had like clothes that I have on right now, like they came from the club or something like that, like somebody just picked them up from a club or a bar. And there was this. He was a first class petty officer on the base. Like I said, they were off world Germans, but he looked like a Gestapo. He had slick back hair, blonde, an undercut, a leather trench coat, and like the knee high boots, the spit shine boots, and everything. And he was kind of gesturing to the reptile like he was concerned about it. He looked concerned, but he wasn't talking. He was just doing that with his hands. And the reptile's back was towards me, and it was kind of doing the same thing. And I slid off the chair, and I remember the footrest hit me in the back, and it hurt because it was, like I said, it was so high up. And I was kind of weaving back and forth, and I said, "Can I go to bed now?" And I fell on my. That's just the first thing that came to my head. I had amnesia. I was really out of it. I was exhausted. I fell on my hands and knees, and I could barely keep myself up. And I saw his boots go in my vision, and he said, "I should have you executed for what you did to my man. Do you hear me?" And then Reptile said, "It doesn't matter. He doesn't remember." And I just fell down on my side and I passed out. I woke up. He was carrying me like a duffel bag, and with my head to the back, and he was right on my bladder. His arm was right on my bladder, and I was just, it was almost like an ignorance is bliss. You don't remember anything. You're kind of like a kid or something. You're like naive. And I said, I had to pee. Set me down. And he wasn't listening. I said, let me, set me down. I have to pee. And then I just said, I'm going to pee on you. And I just passed out. I just passed out again. And then I saw a bright light. Robert, the XO, later on told me it was looking glass technology. He said all underground bases have it, which is like a portal kind of thing. And he set me down on this big medical bed. It was wider than a normal one, but it had the bars on it and everything, almost like it was meant for one of them. And I saw one of those big lights, so surgery lights with the LEDs all over it, like the more modern ones. And I heard ripping and tearing. I heard like ripping, and somebody started putting like stickers on my chest, like heart monitor stuff. And then I remember the reptile said he has to urinate, and I heard one long tear. And this woman, it was a woman. She put a catheter in me, and she was actually on the base. She was a IT, so she volunteered. She was like a computer tech on the base, but she volunteered for this program and was a nurse on the moon. And I thought she was pretty, and I was like really out of it. And it was kind of like ignorance is bliss. And I was like, "Oh, you're pretty." And then she started laughing, and I heard another girl laughing, and I said, "Can I hold your hand?" And she's like, "Wait a minute." And she was doing whatever she was doing, and then she let me hold her hand, and I just passed out. And I woke up, and I was in the same room by myself. And then she came in, and she put her purse. She had like a bag or something she put on a table, and then she brought out a smart glass pad, is what it's called, and it's based off of the smartphone's based off of it. And it's just like a rectangular pad. It's it's clear. You put your palms on it, and then like images appear. It creates like a telepathic link with you. A lot of ET tech creates like a telepathic link, so you just have to kind of think what you want, and it happens. And I could see like a figure of a humanoid, with like a circulatory system, and she put her hand into the heart and go like that, and the heart got bigger. She put her hand in the brain, went like that, the brain got bigger, and she was doing like a physical of me, is what it seemed like. And she went to leave for the day, and I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "Don't leave me." She said, "Oh, it's okay. I'll be back tomorrow." And I got right in her path, and I said, "I don't know what to do or say, but I don't want you to leave me." And she liked that, so she just grabbed my wrist and took me outside. And it was almost like we were in a courtyard of a condominium. It seemed like there were like 5 levels up. There were women with some of them had babies, and they were waving. And there were all these men, and they had like these gray like jumpers on, like jumpsuits, kind of this a one piece kind of jumper, and they were waving at the women. And behind me, at the building that I came out of, there was like a train. So it seemed like it was almost like in between shifts, where they were going to work and other people were coming from work. And there were these 4 big lifts in the middle of this courtyard, and they had no railing or anything like that. And I remember whenever they lifted up, I looked into it, and there was this big springs in it, almost like an elevator, like these big springs. And she grabbed my hand, and we just walked on this lift. And there was, like I said, no railing, so it was kind of scary. We went all the way up to the 5th floor, and it just like took us right to the room. So it went up, and it just went forward. And I remember there was a woman with a baby on the sidewalk of this 5th floor, and there was no railing. And I said, "Aren't you afraid you're going to fall off?" And she said, "Oh no, you can't fall off." And she just stepped off. And she said, "The kids play on it." She said, "They're not supposed to." And I said, "Well, how far does it go?" She said, "It goes all the way to the other wall, all the way across." So it was almost like there was like these invisible fields on each floor, so you couldn't fall off. We went in, and it was kind of like Spartan, the room. It was, one table, one coffee table, a couch, a bar area, like a kitchen looking area, a bathroom, bedroom. And she took my hand and took me into the bedroom, and we started to kiss. And she said, "Wait," she said, "What's your name?" And I said, I don't remember." And she said, "Come on, think. Everybody remembers their name." And I said, "Daryl." And then, we started kissing more. We had sex. And then I was like leaning on the headboard, and she was laying on my chest, and I just kind of just dozed off. And I woke back up, and I was in England. And like that's how it happened for me. It was just like I was just back. And I kind of had these images of like reptiles, like blonde hair, blue eyed people being in a lot of pain, things like that. But it was almost like it just boom. But that was concrete. That was like 100% real. And I remember I stood up, and I said I was with a woman. I was like, "What just happened? What just happened?" Like I was freaking out. And I, ran my fingers through my hair, and I had burnt stubble in my hair. And then I ran it down my chest hair, and I had burnt stubble. And then there was a body mirror on the door, and I looked at myself, and I was in really good shape. Like I was really toned, like like more muscular than I was before. And when I walked out, there was a guy. He was waiting for me. He was one of the guys who was in the room, with the Xbox talking about all this stuff. And he said, "Congratulations, you made it back." And I said, "What?" And he said, "20 years is a long time. A lot of people don't make it back." And I really didn't know what to make of it. And it was just weird and eerie. And that's the introduction that like I try to get over. And I mean, if you have any questions or anything like that.
It's incredible. This this interaction first occurred with you observing a gray behind the glass, and then after that, you encountered this reptilian who leads you into this area where he does some kind of experiment with you on a chair. And it seems like this was all leading up to them getting you to mate with this woman. Is that what I'm understanding? Is that what happened
Mm,
essentially?
no, I mean that I was supposed to go directly with them. Like the Nordics is what the military calls them, Pleiadians. Robert told me that they call themselves Taigetans because they live. Uh, their star is Taygeta in the Pleiades cluster and the constellation of Orion. And once you achieve space travel, you name your people yourselves after your star. That way, you can just point at a star chart and say that's where I'm from. Like that's me. But yeah, it led up to that, but that wasn't. I mean, it could be because of just the fact that these higher density beings, this chair was to put you up in a higher state of consciousness, I guess you would say. So they can kind of do things like look future in time. They could see in the future a lot better than us. That whole thing that time is an illusion is actually real, and but we don't realize it because we're artificially kept at third density, which is Robert explained to me as hell. He said we're in hell. He said Earth is hell. He said because there's no other world like us. Like we're in last place. Like we're the like we're the last ones in the universe to not go up to the next level because the reptiles are keeping us, the draconian empire, whatever you want to call it, they're keeping us artificially in this lower density. So I mean, it could have led up to that in some sort of way, but I don't know. Yeah.
Well, of course, as I've spoken about, I discovered you reading several of David Icke's books. And in a lot of his books, he talks about the presence and history of the images of reptilian type beings all through ancient history and independent from each other all over the world at the same time. Is this the presence that was above ground at one point and is now underground? And do you think this reptile you encountered is part of that race that once was living above ground and dominated mankind?
Well, that reptile, I don't believe. I think that was more like a worker or a warrior caste. I mean, there's reptiles on different worlds in the universe, and they get enslaved by the draconians, like others, and they're forced to kind of just do these things. So they're not all necessarily negative or evil or whatever you want to call it, but the draconians definitely are. But I would say, yeah, 100%. I mean, Robert was telling me things like this was the XO later on. Um, you know, the Aztecs and things like that. The Mayans, they always have the reptile heads on their pyramids, and people claim it's because of that they liked iguanas so much or something like that. I was in Honduras and I saw the pyramids and things like that, and that's what the tour guide said. But yeah, Robert said it was because yeah they helped these people build these pyramids, and they were basically like loosh factories. That's when they committed the sacrifices and things like that. Loosh is like pain and suffering and anger and things like that. So you can imagine walking up these steps waiting to get your heart cut out, how terrifying that would be. So it was almost like this drug that the reptiles were kind of feeding off of that were probably living in the pyramid at the time. But he explained to me that the Egyptian pyramids were built by like higher beings, and they had they were actually for they were a power source. They were actually like large batteries for free energy and things like that. But yeah, I mean, these beings were there, and also he explained to me that the reptiles, they live in a fourth density. Uh, Aquino, this guy, the Satanist, was actually kind of like the reptilian shapeshifters that David Icke talk about. After poking that reptile in the eye, I got 3 months in the mind of the moon. The Germans figured out my intelligence level, so then they picked me up, and I was in the Dark Fleet Nachtwaffen for 2 years, and then I was in Solar Warden the rest of the time, or with them, like the Nordics. And yeah, so when I was being tortured for the punishment of poking the reptile in the eye, because we're looked at as like nothing, and for us to do something like that, that's like a death sentence for a reptile. And I was strapped to like a torture rack kind of thing. I was in the caverns underneath this underground base, and I was like strapped to a torture rack. And I remember I saw a Kino first. No, I saw a reptile on my face, and it was black like onyx, and it had fangs. It had a red hood on, a red cloak, and kind of the eyes were kind of on the side of its head. It kind of had like an elongated snout with like the fangs and everything. So it was a different species. And he said, "Don't you remember me, Daryl?" He was saying that, and I didn't know what was happening because, like I said, I got pushed back down at the third density, so I had kind of this temporary amnesia. I didn't know what was happening, and all of a sudden, it was just kind of like two images kind of came together, and then I saw a Kino in my face. But I kind of saw the reptile kind of creep back into the shadows near the back of the wall. And he said, "Do you remember me now?" And I just kind of turned around past the Kino and I said, "Nice trick," because I could see what was happening. But I think that's kind of like how the reptilian shapeshifter thing works. That same guy, Lando, he told me one time because Robert said that he had people on the base kind of asking me questions and asking me things to see if I had memories of the 20-year and back. And he said that this guy Johnson told me there's this machine that can extract the consciousness out of a person, but they have to do it before puberty, but they can't be but they can't be too young because the body's mostly sedentary, mostly just sitting still. So they do it when they're around 9 or 10. And he told me he walked into the underground base, walked past the break room, which I guess has a long window, saw Aquino sitting in the break room, came back after a 12-hour shift, and Aquino was sitting in the same place, almost like he didn't move. And he explained to me that once they extract the consciousness out, they can put another consciousness in. So it's almost like these reptilians, they can kind of astral project, I guess you would say, their consciousness into a body that has no soul, no consciousness, and almost move it around like a puppet. And that's what Aquino was. But yeah, Robert explained to me that because we were talking about it in the office, we were talking about Aquino for a long time, and he got kind of creeped out. And he said, "We should stop talking about Aquino." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Aquino's fourth density." And I said, "So?" And he said, "We can conjure him." And I said something like, "What are we, 10-year-old girls at a slumber party? We could conjure him. What are you talking about?" And he said, yeah. And he said that he's at like a certain density of astral plane spirit world where if you talk about him too much, we could conjure him, or we think about him too much. And he said he could be in the room with us right now and we wouldn't see him. He said the only reason you saw him is because he showed himself to you. So yeah, that was like kind of the things I learned about the reptiles on that level. I mean, yeah, and I would say 100%. David Icke's right about the whole. Yeah, I was told we used to worship them. They were once our gods, things like that. But yeah,
So all this negative stuff that's going on in the world, you're talking about the illnesses, the excess deaths, the wars, the anxiety, the deprivation. This is all feeding this reptilian force. Is that right?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, the reptiles they hold a grudge against us. I mean, in a certain way, just because of the war and everything else that they lost that we participated in. I heard about things like genetic manipulation and their original experiment was wiped out and we were put in its place, things like that. But yeah, I mean, Robert even told me that this isn't natural. Like the way we're living isn't natural. Killing each other isn't natural. This is all something that, like, yeah, the reptiles do. Satanists, if that's what you want to call them, because high-ranking Satanists work directly in these underground caverns. They work directly with these reptiles. They wear black cloaks, stereotypical, with black hoods and everything like that. And they work directly with these reptiles. Um, yeah, and all of it. Yeah, before he told me that our solar system is in lockdown pretty much and that we're winning whatever this is, at least for our own solar system we've won this war. But before, uh, groups like Solar Warden, and we're getting outside help as well, lock this solar system down. Yeah, ships used to like pretty much hover right over war zones and just kind of like bathe in this pain and suffering and loosh, this hatred. You know what I mean? They could cloak themselves and they can just hover right over like war areas and to soak it in. And yeah, so they do all this on purpose. They cause all this hate and animosity to one another just to kind of get a high almost because it's like the reptiles. They really don't have feeling because they have that reptilian brain. So when our fear is like so strong too. Like our emotions are stronger than I think pretty much any ET. And it's because of that, it's almost like they use this as like a drug, not only for like things like I don't know. Are you going to edit for this channel? I don't know. Is there
Oh
certain
yeah.
things that you can say?
Yep.
The drug you hear about, that keeps people young and gets people high, like Hollywood stars. Robert told me about that. They also use that. They use
What
children.
what what drug is that? I've never heard of it.
Adrenochrome.
Oh, oh, we have.
Yeah, yeah. Robert told me about that because when I was being drugged to be tortured by Aquino, there was this guy that I knew him from drinking on the bar on the base, and he used to tell me things like a life I didn't know I had. And he was telling me all this stuff. He used to get drunk, and he would tell me things. And he was on my left, and this woman I call him the goon, and I call her the goth. He looked like a goon. He had a shaved head. He was big. And this other girl, she like always wore pentagrams and stuff like that. And she was on my right side, and they were dragging me, and I was naked. And that was one of the things. Besides like the burnt chest hair, I had clay on the tops of my feet, and I didn't know why. And I was being drugged in this underground cavern below the underground base, which I'm told all underground bases have these. And she said, "I'm tired," and she said, "Let's take a break." And he said, "All right." She dropped my side, but he was still holding on to me. And I was looking around. I was really out of it, like I said. And there were these cages, looked like dog kennels, kind of stacked up. I don't know, about 5 high and about 5 wide. And there were little kids kind of huddled up in the back, and they were naked and pure white, and their hair was matted. And this little girl came up to me, crawled up in the cage real fast and slammed her hands on the front of the cage. And I saw like her eyes were big and her pupils were huge, like she never saw the sunlight before. And this woman, she hit the cage. She said, "Get the fuck back." And the girl kind of scurried back. And Robert told me that she would have attacked me if she got out. He told me this later, but because they're feral, it's like they've never been held or talked to. They don't know how to speak, so they're almost like wild animals. He said that she would have attacked me, and he asked me if I've ever seen the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and I said yes. And he said, "You remember the adrenochrome scene?" I said yes. He said, "That's where they get it from." He said they electrocute the cages. They put a current to the cage, which electrocutes the kids, starts their adrenaline going, and it knocks them out. They just get shocked. It's almost like a stun gun, and they all get shocked. And they pass out. They strap them to a table, and they give them like a spinal tap near the base of the skull, and it extracts this adrenochrome. And I said, he said they get a pint or two every time. And I said, well, some of those kids were only 3 or 4 years old. I said, that would kill them. He said, it does. He said that they grind them up in something that looks like a wood chipper and they feed them to the other children. So it's like a forced cannibalism kind of thing. And he told me they get it from most of the kids, they get them from these brothels on the mines of the moon. If the kids' scores aren't high enough, they'll put them through these portals, these stargates, and they'll bring them into these underground bases and use them for adrenochrome harvesting.
Unbelievable. So does that account for a lot of the missing children? We hear a lot in the United States and through the world of children just being disappeared and never seen or heard from again. Are they being collected by some extraterrestrial agency and then being transported to the moon? Is that what's going on?
I mean, I wouldn't give it a fancy name like that. I would just call it Satanist. That's pretty much what they are. I mean, that's really I don't know if you would say they worship the reptiles, but like I said, they can do things with like see into the future better than us, so they can get, the reptiles will do things for them. What wars you should fight, what investments should you make, what should you do? They'll just tell them things like that. But yeah, I would call it just more Satanists do that. They kidnap kids and they bring in these underground bases.
Unbelievable. I want to know how your life is at this point. How have things been since the military? How is your everyday life? I mean, the things you've experienced, you seem pretty normal compared to what most people probably would be had they experienced what you've experienced. So how are you doing at this point in life?
In the beginning, it was hard, and that was one of the reasons why Robert wanted me to go back to the chair. He said it's going to be hard. I was homeless to the point where I was couch surfing, things like that. I couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't I couldn't focus. I couldn't function. I had all these memories, and I eventually had to block it out. I mean, I knew I couldn't remember. I couldn't think about this constantly because I would kill myself. So I just kind of like I have the ability, I guess, to just kind of block out memories like that. And it was very difficult for a long time, but I mean, I'm doing much better. I mean, I have my life together. I own a home, things like that. So yeah, my life is doing a lot better compared to what it was 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Um,
You look really young.
yeah, I'm 46. Yeah,
Oh, you look very young for 46. Wow.
thank you, thank you. Good genetics. I don't know. Maybe it was like, I mean, one of the things they do is they put you in a med bed afterwards, and maybe that's one of the reasons they kind of give you like a clean bill of health. But Robert told me the Germans were ticked off at me because I was telling off Aquino, and then I poked the reptile in the eye, and that's like their superior, the off-world Germans, whatever you want to call them, Nazis or whatever. And yeah, Robert told me that they kind of like, messed up my body, not like horrendously, but a bit in the med bed instead of like actually helping me. Things like I have tinnitus, they would have helped with that. You know what I mean? My vision, they would have helped with that. They would have helped me with all these different things when you come back normally. But because they were ticked off at me because of the whole event, which I didn't know what was happening, they decided to show me, add insult to injury kind of thing. So it could be from the med bed, it could be from being age regressed, or it could just be genetics. But yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad to see you're in good health. Well, Daryl James, thanks so much for doing this. I'll stop recording, but I hope we can pick it another time and get into some other topics.
Can I make some announcements?
Yes.
My website is DarylDJames.com, DARYL, as in Delta, James.com. And I'm going to a conference called Deceptions on March 22nd to the 24th in Lubbock, Texas. So, and then I'm going to another event called Alien Event on April 11th to the 14th in Los Angeles at the LAX hotel at the airport. Those are my two things coming up. Yeah.
Good. I'll put those in the description as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Stay on the line, but for now, thanks very much. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Good to be here.